Meisenheim is a town in the Bad Kreuznach district in Rhineland-Palatinate, Germany. It belongs to the light-named Verbandsgemeinde, and is also its seat. Meisenheim is a state-recognized recreational resort, and it is set out as a middle center in state planning. Geography. Location: Meisenheim lies in the valley of the River Glan at the northern edge of the North Palatine uplands. The municipal area measures 1,324 hectares. Neighboring municipalities. Clockwise from the north, Meisenheim's neighbors are Rambach, Rayborn, Kaulbach, Riffelbach, Odenbach, Breitenheim and Essling, all of which likewise lie within the Bad Kreuznach district, except for Odenbach, which lies in the neighboring Kusel district. Constituent communities also belonging to Meisenheim are the outlying homesteads of Hofwieserk, Kedderterhof and Rotherhof. History. Meisenheim is believed to have arisen in the 7th century AD, and its name is often derived from the town's hypothetical founder, Meiser. In 1154, Meisenheim had its first documentary mention, sometimes cited as such, however, is a document dated the 14th of June 891 from the West Frankish king Otto pp. 164 to 279, within which p. 164 and by W. Saurengeschichte des Nahe Hans Rückrau Mays pp. 69 and amp. 72, but this document is falsified. pp. 653 to 765, within which p. 688 and amp. pp. 753 to 757. In the 12th century, Meisenheim was raised to the main seat of the Counts of Veldenz, and in 1315 it was granted town rights by King Ludwig IV. On what is now known as Schlossplatz, the Counts of Veldenz built a castle, bearing witness to which today are only two buildings that were later built: the Schloss Magdalenenbau and above all the Schloss Gisch, building work on which began in 1479. Both buildings were built only after the Counts of Veldenz had died out in 1444 and the county had been inherited by the Dukes of Palatinate's Zweibrücken. This noble house, too, at first kept the seat at Meisenheim, but soon moved it to Zweibrücken. From 1538 to 1571, Duke Wolfgang of Zweibrücken maintained in Meisenheim a mint, with one interruption, although this was then moved to Bergzabern. The Doppeltaler, Taler and Halbtaler coins minted in the time when the mint was in Meisenheim remain among the highest quality mintings from Palatinate's Zweibrücken. In 1799, Duke of Zweibrücken Maximilian IV inherited, besides the land that he already held, the long-united lands of the Electorate of Bavaria and Electorate of the Palatinate. While these three countries were now de jure in personal union, this did not shift the power structures on the ground at all, for Palatinate's Zweibrücken had already been occupied by French revolutionary troops. Because of the terms of the Congress of Vienna, the part of Palatinate's Zweibrücken lying north of the Glan, and thus Meisenheim too, were assigned not to the Kingdom of Bavaria but rather to the Landgraviate of Hesse-Homburg. From 1816 onwards, Meisenheim was the administrative seat of the Oberum of Meisenheim and an Oberschultheißerei. In 1866, the Grand Duchy of Hesse inherited the whole territory, but after losing a war later that same year, the Grand Duchy had to cede Hesse-Homburg to the Kingdom of Prussia. The town of Meisenheim itself was not wholly reunited until after the Second World War, when state of Rhineland-Palatinate was founded. Until then, the lands just across the Glan had been Bavarian since the Congress of Vienna. Jewish history. Meisenheim had a Jewish community possibly even as far back as the Middle Ages, after it was granted town rights in 1315. The first documentary mention of a Jew, however, did not come until 1551 when Ejud Moses cropped up in the record. He was selling a house on Schweinsgasse. In 1569, the Jews were turned out of the town. After the 30 Years' War, 2 Jewish families were allowed to live in the town. In 1740, the number of Jewish families was still supposed to be kept down to 4, but this rule was often not upheld. The reasons given for these restrictions were mainly economic. 14thly, no more than 4 Jewish families should live and be tolerated in the local town. This rose under High Prince Gustav's state government to 7 such, which has not only caused the local grocers through the constant hawking and the butchers through Shechita great harm and loss of sustenance, but also has already put many citizens and peasants to ruination, and furthermore still means that the little protection money that your High Princely Serene Highness draws from these people by far does not offset this harm, whereby your High Princely Serene Highness harms his truest subjects. If a few provisions have been indulged in as a result of the hawking and Shechita, bizarrely the Butchers' Guild article, then these Jews, as a dogged and naughty people, are not troubled by them, but rather begin their abuses anew after some time has gone by. We therefore ask, most humbly, that your High Princely Serene Highness most kindly deign to reduce the Jews here to the citizenry's greatest consolation, back to 4, by strengthening the provisions for the forbidden hawking and the Butchers' Guild article for excessive Shechita. Following the 1740 decree, the Jews moved to nearby villages, still keeping themselves near the market, which to them was a matter of survival, and which was of course also necessary for economic growth. The grocers, and above all the butchers, could thus not be wholly free of the competition, especially as the government knew enough to prize good taxpayers. This shift also applied across borders, and thus not only to the villages belonging to the canton of Meisenheim, but also to the bordering Palatine villages such as Odenbach. A thorough analysis of this shift of town and country Jews appears in W. Kemp's review, and this work also contains a taxation roll of Jews in the canton of Meisenheim, showing the tax burdens borne by Jews living in the outlying villages of Madar, Breitenheim, Schweinschied, Lollbach, Merxheim, Barweiler, Meddersheim, Stordenheim and Hunsbach. The modern Jewish community arose in the 18th century, according to a report from 1860. The oldest readable gravestone then at the Meisenheim graveyard bore the date 1725. Thus, presumably Jews were then still allowed to live in the town. In the time of the French Revolution, there were fewer Jewish families, among whom was a butcher who was allowed to ply his trade in town. About 1800, it is clear that several families fled to the town to escape Johannes Buckler's crime wave. In the earlier half of the 19th century, the number of Jewish inhabitants grew sharply, mostly because of the arrival of newcomers from Jewish villages in the Hunsrück area. The number of Jewish inhabitants developed as follows. In 1808, there were 161, in 1860, 260, in 1864, 198, in 1871, 160, in 1885, 120, in 1895, 87, in 1902, 89. Also belonging to the Breitenheim Jewish community were the Jews living in Breitenheim. In 1924 they numbered 2. In the way of institutions, there were a synagogue, a Jewish primary and religious school, a mikveh and a graveyard. To provide for the community's religious needs, a primary and religious schoolteacher, alongside the rabbi, was hired, who also busied himself as the Hasan and the Shoshe. For a time, the Hasen's position was separate from the schoolteachers. In the 19th century, a man named Benjamin Unruh worked as primary school teacher from 1837 to 1887 to 50 years. In 1830, he taught 32 children, in 1845, 46, and in 1882, 21. At either Unruh's retirement or his death in 1890, the Jewish primary school was closed, and thereafter Jewish schoolchildren attended the evangelical school, while receiving religious instruction at the Jewish religious school. 1875 to 1909, the community's Hasen and religion teacher was Haman der Beer. The last religion teacher, from 1924 to 1928, was Julius Vus. In 1924, he taught 15 children, but by 1928, this had shrunk to 7. After he left, the few school-age Jewish children left were taught by the schoolteacher from Sobenheim. Meisenheim was in the 19th century the seat of a rabbinate, with the rabbi bearing the title Landsrabbiner of the Obrim of Meisenheim in Hesse-Homburg times and Kreisrabbiner in Prussian times. Serving as rabbi were the following: one member of Meisenheim's Jewish community fell in the First World War, Leo Sender. Also lost in the Great War was Alfred Moritz, but he had moved to Köln by 1914. About 1924, when there were still 55 members of the Jewish community, the community's leaders were Moritz Rosenberg, Simon Schlachter, Albert Kaufmann and Hermann Levy. The representatives were Louis Strauss, Levi Bloch, Albert Kahn and Siegmund Kahn. Employed as schoolteacher was Julius Vus. He taught at the community's religion school and taught Jewish religion at the public schools. In 1932, the community's leaders were Moritz Rosenberg, Simon Schlachter and Felix Kaufmann. The community had since found itself without a schoolteacher. Instruction was then being given the Jewish schoolchildren by Felix Moses from Sobenheim. Worthy of mention among the then still active Jewish clubs is the Jewish Women's Club, which concerned itself with supporting the poor. In 1932, its chairwoman was Mrs. Schlachter. In 1933, the year when Adolf Hitler and the Nazis seized power, there were still 38 Jews living in 13 families in Meisenheim. Thereafter, though, some of the Jews moved away or even emigrated in the face of the progressive stripping of the rights and repression, all brought about by the Nazis. Already by that year, intimidating measures were being undertaken. Chauchet's knives were being seized by brown shirt and Stahlhelm thugs. Several well-known Jewish businessmen were taken into so-called protective custody. Jewish businesses were Aryanized, the last ones in June 1938. On Kristallnacht, the synagogue sustained substantial damage, and worse, the Jewish men who were still in town were arrested. With the deportation of the last Jews living in Meisenheim to the south of France in October 1940, the Meisenheim Jewish community's history came to an end. According to the Gedenkbuch Opfer der Verfolgung der Juden unter der Nationalsozialistischen Gewaltschaft in Deutschland 1933 to 1945 and Yad Vashem, as compared against other data, critically examined and completed by Wolfgang Kemp. Of all Jews who either were born in Meisenheim or lived there for a long time, 44 died in the time of the Third Reich: Ferdinand Altshuler, Tekla Bar and Qt Frankel, Hedwig de Beer, Clara de Beer, Casilia de Beer, Sigmund Kahn, Ida Kahn and Qt Kaufmann, Sigmund's wife, Adolf David, Julius David, Leo Frankel, Julius Frankel, Karl Joseph Frankel, Pauline Goldman and Qt Frankel, Frieda Hamburger and Qt Schlachter, Willy Hamburger, Sohn von Frieda, Albert Lob, Flora Lob and Qt de Beer, Julius Maas, Martha Mayer and Qt Frankel, Georg Meyer, Selma Meyer, and E.Q.T. Schlachter, Georgie's wife, Simon's and Eliza's daughter, Johanna Nathan and E.Q.T. Strauss, Moritz Rosenberg, August Rosenberg and E.Q.T. Stern, Moritz's wife, Elsa Rosenberg, Moritz's and August's daughter, Flora Sandel and E.Q.T. de Beer, Justine Scheuer and E.Q.T. Frankel, Simon Schlachter, Elizabeth Leese and E.Q.T. Sondheim, Simon's wife, Adele Silberberg and E.Q.T. David, Simon Schlachter, Isidor Stern, Walter Stern, Ida Strauss and E.Q.T. Strauss, Isaac Julius Strauss, Isaac Strauss, Laura Strauss and E.Q.T. Michelle, Louis' wife, Lily Strauss, Louis and Laura's daughter, Rudolf Strauss, Louis and Laura's son, Isidor Weil, Jacob's brother, Friederike Rika Weil and E.Q.T. Stein, Jacob's widow, Dr. Otto Weil, Jacob's and his first wife Therese and E.Q.T. Schwartz's son, Hedwig Weil and E.Q.T. Meyer, wife of Hugo Emanuel Jacobs and his second wife Friederike and E.Q.T. Stein's son, Alfred Abraham Weil, Hedwig's and Hugo's son. After 1945, the only Jews who came back to Meisenheim were one married couple, Otto David and his wife, listed in the table that follows of the fates of some of Meisenheim's Jewish families. In comparison with the list of victims, it comes to light that idyllic and introspective Meisenheim was gladly sought out by expectant mothers as a place to give birth. Those born in Meisenheim markedly outnumbered those who had moved there. 3 persons, who indeed were also born in Meisenheim but whose lives did not center around it, lived in Mannheim at a senior's home and thus were seized in the Saarpfalz-Baden action undertaken by the 2 Gauleiter Berkel and Wagner and, thereby centrigers. They were Ferdinand Altschuler and the sisters Ida and Johanna Strauss. Now standing in memory of many of those Jews who died or were driven out in the Shoah called Stolperstein, which were only laid in the town on the 23rd of November 2007 after town council's unanimous vote in response to the Meisenheim synagogue sponsorship and promotional association chairman Gunter Lenhoff's proposal. Criminal history. Like many places in the region, Meisenheim can claim to have had its dealings with the notorious outlaw Schinderhan. In early 1797, the already well-known robber committed one of his earliest burglaries in Meisenheim. One night, he climbed into a master tanner's house and stole part of his leather stock, which he then apparently tried to sell back to the tanner the next day. In the spring of 1798, Schinderhan went dancing several times at inns in Meisenheim. Religion. Meisenheim's evangelical Christians belong, as one of the church's southernmost communities, to the Evangelical Church in the Rhineland, while the Catholics belong to the Roman Catholic Diocese of Trier. As at the 30th of November 2013, there are 2,764 full-time residents in Meisenheim, and of those, 1,739 are evangelical, 591 are Catholic, 8 are Lutheran, 1 belongs to the New Apostolic Church, 41 belong to other religious groups and 384 either have no religion or will not reveal the religious affiliation. Politics. Town Council. The council is made up of 20 council members, who are elected by proportional representation at the municipal election held on the 7th of June 2009, and the honorary mayor as chairman. The municipal election held on the 7th of June 2009 yielded the following results. Mayor Meisenheim's mayor is Werner Keim. Previously Volkart Y elder coat of arms. The town's arms might be described thus: Buffer Sergeant a D-million azure armed and langed gules and crowned or and gules are bluted proper. The charge in the upper field, the lion, is a reference to the town's former allegiance to the Counts of Veldens, while the one in the lower field, the bluted, is a canting charge for the town's name, Meis being the German word for tit. This, however, is not actually the name's derivation. Meisenheim was razed to town in 1315 by King Ludwig IV. From the 12th century onwards, the town was held by the Counts of Veldens. The arms are based on the town's first seal from the 14th century. It already bore the two charges that the current arms bear. In the 18th century, there was another composition in the town's seal showing a line above a bendy lozenge field while that it appeared on an escutcheon. This change reflected a change in the lordship after the Counts of Veldens died out in 1444 and were succeeded by the House of Wittelsbach, who bore arms, bendy lozenge argent and azure. This pattern can still be seen in Bavaria's coat of arms and flag today. The former arms, however, were reintroduced in 1935. The article and the website Heraldry of the World show three different versions of the arms. The oldest, seen at Heraldry of the World, comes from the Coffee Hag albums from about 1925. It shows the tit in different tinctures, namely argent and sable. The arms with the Wittelsbach bendy lozenge pattern are not shown.